the immune system. If people are talking about the mechanism whereby an organism gets rid of some undesirable materials, you might be talking about what I'm thinking about. What is this actually? What is this undesirable? What is the nature of undesirability? Especially when we're talking about in regards to some materials that are lodging in the proximity of a certain human that is desiring that the proximity be otherwise to suit comforts of the organism. This means that the organism has a natural inclination to get away from some object or get it away from it. This essentially is chemistry. This is chemistry within the body of the organism working to be pejorative, to be negative towards this object in its enveloped, in its mind, in its senses. On a more cellular level, there are materials that are unwanted. And when we start talking about wants and maybe even needs, and well, let's just leave it as wants and undesirables. On a cellular level, we are talking about the same thing as on a larger macro level. Really, essentially, it is the immune function whereby there are undesirable materials, and they must be, and they don't need to be actually, but this situation ensues in such a way that forces channel to move to, not actually to, but in such a way that an object gets removed. And when you look at an organism, you can see that this is not a random system. There are specific materials that are channeled out in a specific manner, and there's no person that we know of as organisms that's controlling each of these movements out away from the cells. Like when we tell our mate down the road to move away, we know all about that. And I'm saying it's the same thing. So I've got to somehow bridge it, but I don't really need to, because I'm a scientist. I'm infallible. I mean, I'm not infallible. So we have these concepts: immune system, the pejorative instinct on the cellular level. Somehow, when we end up with a splinter in us, eventually it is ejected, generally. Somehow, a whole region and patch of cells will become slightly dead. They will lose their balance in chemistry. What I mean by balance is their stability in their track record. They maintain a certain pH, etc. Even electro voltage, I'm sure on some level. Suddenly it changes. Sometimes there is no bacteria involved, whereby the body still gets rid of these cells. The body has to do it somehow, and it has to, it doesn't actually, on an ultimate level, it's not a thinking mind. These are all just repercussions of historical moments in evolution that these old cells turn into what many people are calling viruses, and they are extricated from the body in a logistical fashion, such as you've found these antibodies that the body produces. These same kind of materials, you would call them, because the way that they are refined is in a manner that they are the result of a preloaded code of action and actions on, chemical actions on, that when this happens, this is going to happen, and if it's successful, it will get promoted. If an organism is successful with maintaining itself with all its mechanisms, you will have more children, etc., than the ones who are not doing as well. So these immune systems that have manifested in these complex organisms, even trees, is forced to get rid of something out of their body. It's not some subcontracting entity that the human hires and feeds new information, updates with software packages. These antibodies, it's the same kind of force when there is actually a heap of cells that go rotten and bacteria proliferate as a result of the change in the cellular terrain. That's where the terrain theory comes from. When they say it is the terrain, I mean the biggest scientists that are dead, they mean when you see a patch of cells and you see microbes floating around in a natural kind of environment, and you're asking the question of, out of all these patches of cells that you have, when one of them goes rotten, spawns all of these microbes and all of these dynamic processes occur, is it because of the microbe that's floating around, or the spores, or is it because of the terrain that the spores are on? The terrain theory is actually a breakthrough, cutting edge theory in terms of on an anthropological level, what I'm talking about. Well, I'd even go, before, it's probably about Abraham, sort of, and even before Abraham, anyway, however long people have been deciding that disease comes from some attack, some invasion, some force that overrides us from elsewhere, not our own, whatever we are, these cells that become diseased. We've always been thinking, as long as anyone can record human culture, that it comes from a force elsewhere, like when a lion attacks you or something. Just recently, we are now thinking, a minority at this stage still, that it's only been some 150 years that the disease doesn't come from external. No disease actually does. No, even fungus disease. There is no deadly fungus out there that I would vouch for. And again, I'll make this disclaimer at the end of the video that, yeah, this is just my best guess, and that should be a given amongst many people, but it seems people stoop and suggest, maybe even just accidentally, that they know things that they just mathematically do not know. And inflammatory things. And while we're still on the subject of all of that stuff, the immune system, we found that the germs actually they cannot cause a disease in an organism, but they are always there when the disease occurs. We can harm organisms by flooding them with germs. We believe that the germs of the disease, mainly for reasons like the biggest experiments were Joseph Lister in around like 1870s maybe, around, or 50s to 90s, I don't know, of the 1800s. He found that putting on this antibacterial material made the healing quicker of this few patients who had leg wounds. But he didn't prove that it actually increased somebody's chances of healing, of properly healing and overcoming their issue. But it was taken for granted because we believe the germs caused the diseases just then. The majority of the culture did. So when you get some salt on your skin, some kind of salt, and you're going, and you have an itch. That itch, that's an immune response too, because you itch and you move the chemistry in your skin, helps process that salt. It might even get the salt straight off, but there will still be some left on your skin, because straight away, as soon as it hit your skin, there was vapors ejecting, like, and I know there's always vapors ejecting there, but when the salt hit, they were just going as if the salt was an iceberg, maybe even dropped in super hot metal plate or lava. And I mean, like, yeah, something, and all these little bits of salt would have been busting off and going along with the material that was flying off your cells when you hit there. And then when you scratch, it's going to help process and move around. And there might even be some globulin material, kind of material that will coagulate and settle it, and maybe it will get pushed out through the surface, or maybe it will get taken to some processing dungeon. But there is no circumstance where you will die because a bacteria landed on you. And the experiments prove this. And you'll find when they experimented with the Spanish flu, when they experimented with any virus, any bacteria, any fungus that features in a disease and is commonly blamed, like the most popular frog disease, the most popular frog disease and the most hectic disease on Earth right now, probably, in the indicator species. You won't find an experiment where they just added some fungus to a frog and kept one other frog free from the fungus, but all other regards completely equal in the environment and all of that. The same species of frog. You should be able to get some death going if the common best guess for why all these frogs died all over the world is poor quarantine measures, that we brought in these dangerous strains of fungus that these frogs hadn't met, and they weren't immunologically equipped to deal with it, and they just got walloped starting around the 70s. And we should be able to get some frogs and say these are not immunologically equipped for this strain of fungus, and put even just one on them, let alone 20 or 200 or 2,000. But we can't do that and produce a disease. There is said to be a fungus that infects ants, and no one has actually made a micro video camera enough to see whether the spore is actually going in and infecting the ant. Or whether the ant is growing the fungus, because the terrain that an ant is from a fungus's perspective, it changed. That's just my ultimate wager. You know, the reason why I'm at this stage is not, it's obviously not because I can't read or I can't do maths. because when I peered into this, I started asking questions, and every piece of information when I expected that it would just be sorted, every piece of information that came back was just in a line with, yeah, this is a big delusion. And I started at vaccination, and then I moved to the germ theory experiments and some more. All of them, I thought, oh, there's a fungus. I read something from some person, from some South American professors. The germ theory is at least somewhat true, but the chemical theory is most accurately the essential theory of disease. They said that the fungus has been known to infect the ants, but again, it wouldn't be hard to make an experiment and just reference this. Tell us that this is an experiment. This is the reference you can chase down. You can chase down the report. One issue that this culture has, I mean, it's not an issue, but it's a flower, bud. It hasn't arrived yet. In this scientific culture, we have these experiments. They're very precious. They're very great and grand. Some of them, all of them. I just want to say what they've done, and what they recorded. That's value. The more they elaborate, and the better it is. Obviously, if it's better, it's better. But in this day and age, you go to look at an experiment. You want to know. You want to cut to the chase of what actually matters to you. For example, you look up how good is lion's mane. You can't just find, here's one study this university ran, and that. Look at it, and you can't just get it straight, like, takeaway box of information that I could compile. If someone paid me money, I would do it for a job, probably. Saying, for example, the lion's mane, how long the experiment was, how many rats there were, what kind of environment the rats were in, what kind of controls were taken, acknowledge what kind of controls ought to have been taken and whether you took them, in regards to how old the rats were, and whether they all came from the same facilities, are they the same strain, were they developed in the same way, bred and raised. And how much you gave the rats, what kind of material you gave them that was different in the experimental group, and how much, and on what frequency, and what means, all of that. What kind of exercises are as part of the environment? What kind of tests or challenges? And what kind of observations in disease incidents? And mortality data. Performance outcomes in the tests and challenges. That's a little takeaway box. We've got experimental group versus placebo group. Next to everything that I said, the environment of the rats, the placebo group, experimental group, same, yep. And it'll be like an explanation of what the environment was, medication, I don't know. You get the picture, I'm pretty sure, if you're actually following at this stage. For a vaccination experiment, we would come along and see placebo group, yes, okay, they got a saline injection, or they got a slap in the face, or maybe they were cows and they didn't actually get an injection. Maybe they got a slap instead to account for some shock, but they wouldn't, because that'd be an absurd experiment, because it's part of the parcel of receiving a medication. You test what the effect it has on the body, on the organism. It would be a general thing like these COVID vaccines. I worked on like hours to get out this valuable information. That was valuable to me, and it would have been a takeaway box I could have made of what the placebo group was, and what the vaccination group was. When they were vaccinated, how frequent the placebo group, what they were given as a placebo, how long it went for, the controls in place for making sure the groups were the same, and disease measures, the observations, and like placebo group versus vaccine group, disease of this kind, this rate versus that rate, disease of that kind, death, performance on this kind of test daily. PCR tests, HIV PCR tests. Sprinting race now. Yeah, little takeaway box. What actually happened? People spent $20 million on this major experiment. 20 months developing this hectic medicine. $20 million on all these people. Alright, well, they spent a lot of effort and resources developing this. I'm going to just take this little takeaway box. Okay, this group got the medicine, this group didn't. Everything else was the same. This is the general picture of the experiments. So we can come along to the science markets, the future markets, and mate's got these experiments there. There's an official group that does officiating of experiments, the scrutineering. They do the I can't remember what it's called. They're the officials, and they sign off on it, and then we can just trust that. Oh yeah. And if anyone ever pulls their card, you can go through and do major audits, because it's all legit. Anyway, we're at the markets. Everyone's legit at the markets. They just go to takeaway boxes. You might say, oh no, it's more complex than that. How is it ever going to be more complex than someone saying, I lowered mortality in 2 years for people who had a missing limb, because I got them to do this exercise every day. I made people run faster because I developed this certain strain of mandarin, and when you eat it, in this experiment we did over this 2 years, the only thing was these people were having this dose of mandarin, and these other people were having some other mandarin that is a different strain that doesn't have this miracle compound that I developed through GMO. And these sprinters, they run faster. Is it going to be more complex how you developed it? Yes. Is that a takeaway box? Yes. Is it actually more complex than the sprinters didn't run any faster? No. No. Okay. If the person is allowed to get the markets selling this kind of product that they're claiming there's improved sprinting, 100-meter races in adults for 2 years, in the fine print, 2 years. They are not lying. The sprinters did get faster. Is it more complicated? Does it actually make humans faster sprinters? Well, if you're talking about categorically, this person has not lied. Okay, it's a fact. We looked at the experiment. It's not that it definitely occurred. It's just that it's very, very likely that this person's medicine is legit. It's like well beyond what we'd say reasonable doubt. It is more complex to say that that this miracle compound doesn't improve human sprinting. And we actually found out later on in life, because we can't say that, because over generations, the effect that it had on increasing the human potential for top speed running was diminishing over generations. And after the 6th generation, it basically starts going backwards, the human potential. After the 20th generation, humans, they are not running fast at all. That was more complex than saying that miracle compound improves human sprinting capacity. Actually, it doesn't. Actually, it does. How does it work? We don't lie. This isn't shenanigan culture. This isn't faith culture. We actually just so we're at the markets. It's all legit. We got takeaway boxes at every stand, and anyone who doesn't have a takeaway box is a weirdo. I mean, they don't have a market, because the business at the market is for people to come and take something away, and so all these vaccination trials, they're going to be out there, they're going to have a little vaccination stand just for historical, just for nostalgic sort of funny sort of, it'll be just funny. And they're going to have placebo disease, 1.5 vaccination hepatitis B group, and vaccination 20 vaccinations they got, and it's 10 years. They actually had double the amount of disease incidence in general. But that wasn't that much. So they decided that it's okay, and they found that they did PCR tests for a brand new virus that was developed and found in somebody's spit at somebody that was coughing really badly. And yeah, they made it a measuring marker for this kind of code that they made, and a measuring marker that's not precise 100%, but yeah, it doesn't measure disease. It doesn't measure how sick an organism is. But vaccination can lower it in some circumstances, in some time frames.